Racing Roundtable time for this Tuesday, looking back on last week's racing. Nick Tammaro here. They've called the bullpen for a substitute host, and here I am joined by two guys I love to talk racing with. First, at the top right of the screen, James Scully. James, fresh off a trip down to Kentucky Downs, looking to be in fine fettle.
Thank you, Nick. Glad to have you here. We miss Ashley, but you're always a great substitute.
Glad to be here for sure. Vance Hanson also joining us. Vance, I know you're going to span the globe a little bit for some of the content that we're looking forward to hearing about later on.
Absolutely. We had a big Breeders' Cup Mile prep in France on Sunday, and look forward to talking to you about that in a few moments.
No doubt about it. We're going to keep it in the Commonwealth to get things started and talk about Kentucky Downs, as it was their big weekend as a part of their 7-day meet days 5 and 6, where they gave out, I don't even know what the number is, but it was a pretty large amount of money. James was on hand to take in quite a bit of it. So we're going to talk about some takeaways from Kentucky Downs, as well as some of the 2-year-old stakes that we saw out west on closing weekend at Del Mar, and we'll cap things with what else caught your eye at the end of the show. So let's head to Kentucky Downs and talk about the horse that I think garnered the most attention of any based on his latest triumph, his third straight graded stake win. That's Cogburn, who has stamped himself a pretty clear favorite for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint that will take place, of course, coming up in November at Del Mar. Cogburn seen here winning the Ainsworth Turf Sprint as a heavy favorite. He was expected to do so, but I don't know if that's even – I think he exceeded even some of the expectations. James, what did you think of Cogburn getting to see him firsthand?
Yeah, I thought he exceeded expectations. You know, that was a side of loss last year. He got beat in the turf sprint. I think it was his second turf start after Asmussen switched him. And so some people thought he might be a little bit vulnerable, but he won with absolute ease and authority. It was just really remarkable to see him so clear, in deep stretch. And it was just another really brilliant performance. I mean, 107 and like 0.69, I think was the final time. He was coming off that race in the Jaipur at Saratoga during the Belmont at Saratoga meet, where he ran 5.5 furlongs and a world record 59.8 seconds. And just carried his form forward here. Obviously, a much improved horse from last year when he was at Kentucky Downs. You can just see, I mean, it just couldn't have been any easier for a turf sprint. Just don't see too many turf sprint wins like that. And, you mentioned it. There were 10 seven-figure stakes over the 2 days, Saturday and Sunday at Kentucky Downs. And I thought Cogburn was the biggest star of the show.
No doubt about it. We're going to see James catch up with Irad Ortiz Jr., winning jockey aboard Cogburn, before I get Vance's take on it. So let's see what Irad had to say afterwards.
He really took it to him from the start. Was that the plan, to go right to the lead with Cogburn?
Steve don't really give me instructions, but he told me, do the same thing you've been doing. It's been breaking good, so don't change anything. I let him break. He don't have to be on the lead, so he break on top, and he put me right there, so I can take him back. So I let him be him, let him do his thing, and he take me all the way to the wire.
I mean, that was the most convincing performance you'll see. I mean, just like in deep stretch, he had his ears pricked, and it looked like he was just going so easy. Tell us a little bit about the how he wins with authority.
Only one word: it's fun to ride him. To be honest, anybody will love to sit on him because you don't have to do much. To be honest, he deserves a lot of credit, and I just blessed to sit on him and been riding him the last 3 times because he's a special horse. He do his own thing.
You ever had a turf horse of his caliber? I mean, he's the world's best turf sprinter, isn't he?
I mean, I rode Golden Paul. He was a very special sprinter, and a few more, but he's one of them for sure.
All right. Are you looking forward to the Breeders' Cup?
We're looking for, hopefully so. Stay healthy.
All right. Congrats, Irad. Thank you.
That was Irad Ortiz Jr. catching up with James Scully, or perhaps James Scully catching up with Irad Ortiz Jr. Vance, I want to bring you in on this Cogburn conversation. Cogburn, best American turf sprinter blank since?
There was a turf sprinter who won the Breeders' Cup, and his name escapes me real briefly, and wound up being named champion turf male about
Stormy Liberal.
Stormy Liberal, yeah. So, I don't have too much to add to what James has already said, but, off this performance, I suspect Cogburn will be the shortest priced favorite on Breeders' Cup weekend, and deservedly so. And such a dominant force has he been this year that I'm very likely to support him as champion male sprinter when it comes time to vote for the Eclipse Awards. I've been a voter for nearly a quarter century, and I've never supported a grass specialist like him for the award. But to me, I think I'll be breaking my long-standing personal preference for dirt-only performers in that category, Nick.
Yeah, I think he's that kind of horse, right? I would say best turf sprinter ever. I do think Stormy Liberal, Golden Pal would have a little bit of the conversation. The Stormy Liberal World of Trouble showdown in 2018 at Churchill Downs was one for the ages, and one that speed figure-wise would tell you that it was probably the best turf sprint ever run in this country. But nonetheless, Cogburn looks like a horse that has just really reached another level, and the fact that he has that first step as quick as he does, he's just gotten clear so easily. And in both the Jaipur and the Ainsworth Turf Sprint on Saturday, what blew my mind was how much he extended away down the stretch. I mean, winning these races by these margins is just almost totally unheard of, and he's making it look very easy, I think, which Irad alluded to in that post-race interview. Let's talk about a race a little bit earlier from Saturday afternoon, guys. It was actually the 6th, the Light and Wonder Ladies Marathon, and it brought together a pretty evenly matched group going 1 mile and 5/16 on the turf, and was ultimately won by Nisi Marie, a grade 1 placed filly for Butch Reed. What was your take on that performance, Vance, and Nisi Marie's prospects perhaps headed towards a race like the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf?
Good performance by her in the ladies marathon. She's been very well managed all year and has had suffered a few tight losses in photos. So her stakes record this year hasn't had a lot of wins on her record, but she did break through in this spot. She's going to be facing a much better caliber of filly and mares, obviously, in the Breeders' Cup. I'm not quite confident that she's up to the task of upsetting that particular race, but she is like I said, she is a very consistent filly. She's been running very well all season, and perhaps she can get a minor slice of it at Del Mar.
James, did you get any bit of Nisi Marie at 4-1, which, by the way, was also her morning line?
I did. That was my top pick in there, so I was very happy. And listen, I'm just a fan. I think she's improved. I mean, her first win came at Parks last year and like a restricted turf stakes. But she opened this year with, I thought, a solid win over White Beam and the Grade 2 Bogey at Aqueduct. Ran second to Didion, the Grade 1 New York. And then I just thought, I mean, nothing went right from her from an outside post and that paceless Diana. I'm just drawing a line through that. I just consider that to be a trouble trip where she just like spit the bit early. And I thought her third in the Beverly D was very sneaky. Fev Rover, who won that race by open lengths last year, had everything her own way on the front end that day. And it took, I thought, a world-class performance for Mora, who I think's arguably the best like North American filly or mare for the Breeders' Cup Turf this year, to run down Fev Rover. But Nisi Marie looked like she was going to be fourth even in mid-stretch. I thought that was a real sneaky finish from off the pace. I thought she just got a much better setup. She was obviously getting some class relief from those two stakes, I think. But that's a performance that I think she can continue to build upon. I think her best races are coming along right now, and Butch Reed has her right where he wants her. So she might not be good enough to win the Filly and Mare Turf, but she's a late runner that if she did get a good setup, she could potentially hit the board. And I'm sort of bullish on her moving forward, Nick.
Butch Reed, a Breeders' Cup winning trainer, having taken the juvenile fillies in 2020. Let's hear about Butch Reed's take on it. Interviewed, of course, by our own expert, James Scully.
Tell us about Nisi Marie's. Congratulations on winning the race, Butch. Tell us about Nisi Marie's closing kick.
Oh, she's just amazing. And, it's got a lot to do with Joel as well. He didn't panic, even though the speed's been favoring over this racetrack. You can't take your filly out of what she does best, and he knew that, and he did it. And when I saw her wheeler to the outside turn when we were turning for home, I thought we were in pretty good shape.
Yeah, and then the last race, I mean, she really ran a good third considering there was really no pace in that Beverly D. She closed well in the stretch to get up for third, but got a much better setup today. Let's see, Mike.
Absolutely. I saw a half in 48 and change with though. I don't know how that translates over this course, but 48 still 48, so I thought she had a pretty good chance to follow through on that.
Tell us, what are your thoughts on the Kentucky Downs, the turf course here?
Oh, it's just been fantastic. The people have been great, and the turf course, coming from Parks, this turf course is really fantastic, and the atmosphere is unbelievable, and just everybody's having a good time. So this is what horse racing is all about.
Well, congratulations on your big win with Nice Marie and the ladies marathon.
Thank you so much. It's been a great trip.
Thanks again, Butch.
Bringing a filly from Philly down to the Bluegrass to get that win, and that's what a win in a $2 million race looks like afterwards from a training perspective. There are a couple other races we wanted to highlight from the weekend at Kentucky Downs. Let's take a look at Brilliant Birdie winning the race that was on Sunday, the race that I should know the name of it, and it escapes me at the moment. The Gun Runner, excuse me. Of course, I should know. Gun Runner, of course, not only Horse of the Year from 2017, but now top-level stallion. That race was won by Brilliant Birdie, who had won a stake race at Churchill Downs earlier in the year. And James, what did you make of Brilliant Birdie's performance? And of course, worth mentioning, he didn't get out of the gate all that great. Did lose a little bit of ground coming out of it, but really showed off what has now become a patented late kick.
Yeah, definitely. And Brian Hernandez had mentioned that as well. He sort of didn't get out of the gate well, but I thought it was a good performance. I mean, I think he's he is a colt that just broke his maiden on Kentucky Derby week. He didn't want an allowance in the American Derby. May not have faced, the toughest competition in that American Derby, but, definitely First World War, and some horses had some class to them. And in the Secretariat, his last start, Trickery just got the better trip. That pace was pretty mild, and Trickery was coming off a Grade 1 win and just had a tactical advantage over Brilliant Birdie, who's more of a late runner. But I thought this was a solid another step forward for him. I don't really think there's a Breeders' Cup turf race for him this fall, but he's doing everything right at this point of his career, and he's got a chance to continue to improve and be a really good 4-year-old on the turf next year, I think.
Vance, how do you feel about Brilliant Birdie?
Well, I've been a fan of his since the spring at Churchill Downs when he won the American Derby in his stakes debut. James mentioned his second place finish in the Secretariat to Trickery, which I thought was also pretty solid. This particular win I thought was a little bit more workmanlike than some of his efforts at Churchill Downs. It may have been due to the, as you said, to the slow start, the course configuration, but I think there is even more substance to him going forward, and he is a consistent, talented colt, and I think he's been extremely well managed so far by Cherie DeVoe, and I really hope a race like the Hollywood Derby at Del Mar in a couple of months is on his radar, because I think he can be a bit of a sleeper there. I think I've read that Trickery is going to be pointed for the Coolmore Turf Mile at Keeneland by Graham Motion. So there's a possibility that Trickery might not be himself be pointing for the Hollywood Derby. And I think that could open the door for a horse like Brilliant Birdie to sneak in and possibly have a good shot at a Grade 1 by the end of the year.
Looks like a horse who at the very least should have a promising 4-year-old season as well, but I think definitely some real objectives for him in the remainder of his 3-year-old season. Let's keep it with 3-year-olds at Kentucky Downs and talk a little bit about racing's newest Grade 1 winner, Howard Wolowitz, who took the Franklin Simpson, a newly minted Grade 1 for 2024, a race that he won as the favorite, where I should have made him the favorite on the morning line, made him the second choice, and he ended up going off a very clear favorite. But he exacted a little revenge on some of the horses that he had met in the Mahoney up at Saratoga, getting a clean trip to win. And this felt a little bit like one of those situations where Irad maybe moved him up just a tad, giving him a perfect ride from just off the pace. James, you wanted to talk a little bit about what you think could be some future promise for Howard Wolowitz.
Yeah, definitely. I just thought this was, obviously he didn't have the cleanest journey in the Mahoney, and he ran fourth that day. But I just think, the big step forward. This is his first turf win. He had broken his maiden 2 starts previously on synthetics, and you're right. He came over that other horse, West Beach. Looked pretty like he might go by him in deep stretch, and he came over and he bumped him a little bit and found more to win, essentially going away in the end. And I just thought it was a very, to me, the Franklin Simpson is only a Grade 1 on name alone. That wasn't the race they should have made a Grade 1. They probably should have done the turf sprint or one of the others. Last year's Franklin Simpson winner, one-timer, is over 2 this meet at Kentucky Downs. So I don't think that was the toughest race. Easily, was one of the weaker, I thought, of the races on Saturday, the stakes races. But I thought it really featured an up-and-coming performer, so I thought I'd mention Howard Wolowitz. I really like his future for Jose D'Angelo.
A horse definitely looks like he has a little bit of potential. Vance, what did you make of that new Grade 1, the Franklin Simpson?
Yeah, a bit of a Grade 1 in name only, in my opinion. 3-year-old turf sprinters, not a marquee division here in the United States as it is elsewhere in the world. But I'll echo James's sentiments. I mean, this horse is very lightly raced still. It sounds like his connections want to take a stab at the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. I don't think he's in Cogburn's category by any stretch at this point in his career, but he's definitely a horse to look forward to next year after Cogburn presumably goes to the stallion shed.
Yeah, I wonder if Howard Wolowitz and Cogburn encountered each other on Saturday. Howard Wolowitz told him he'd see him at Del Mar. I don't think Cogburn was terribly impressed, but we'll see if those two end up squaring off. One more to look at from Kentucky Downs would be Tistastic, who was victorious coming back on very short rest. That's a theme we're going to touch on a little bit later on in the show, but he was victorious on Sunday afternoon for Steve Asmussen, getting the job done in one of the stakes there that had caught your eye, James.
Yeah, the Kentucky Juvenile on Sunday. And, Tistastic was a colt that I bet first time out at Saratoga when he ran into Chancellor McPatrick, who came back and won the Grade 1 Hopeful. He went to Kentucky Downs on the 29th, broke his maiden in pretty convincing fashion, came back 10 days later here in the Kentucky Juvenile Mile. And, really I thought there for a second he was going to win easy. Then he got in a little bit of a dogfight in deep stretch and still, found a way to prevail. So I thought there were a number of promising runners from first crop sires. We'll get to a pair. I'll get to a pair of them when we get to the Del Mar races. But Tistastic is the son of Tiz the Law, who's really taken to the turf for Steve Asmussen, and I think he's a contender at the very, one to watch for the American ranks for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Del Mar this fall.
Yeah, don't see those purple silks.
Sorry.
Juvenile turf, right, of course. Don't see those purple silks too often for Steve Asmussen, right, Vance? I can't recall ever seeing them.
Yeah, not off the top of my head, I don't either. This horse is going to have to step up a little bit, obviously. Won this race rather narrowly, and the maiden race he won last week, I think, was an auction maiden, if I'm not mistaken. So, nice horse, obviously taken to the grass quite well, but he will need to step up his game against much tougher competition next time.
Yeah, well, he ran twice in short rest. Again, we'll touch on that a little bit later as a topic for a consideration. Let's shift our attention out west after a good look at Kentucky Downs. It was closing weekend at Del Mar, and we've got a few races to touch on that I know Vance wanted to talk a little bit about. I think the centerpiece, you could call it, was the Del Mar Futurity run on Sunday afternoon, and no surprise, winning the Del Mar Futurity for the 18th time. Bob Baffert saddled Gaming, a son of a Game Winner, who, of course, was a Baffert trainee that won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile under the Twin Spires. Vance, what do you make of Gaming and his prospects headed towards November?
Well, as his sire, Game Winner, is not as off to as fast a start as some of the other freshman sires this season, but it is nice to see him have a potential standout in this colt who quite convincingly beats his heavily favored stablemate Getaway Car in the Del Mar Futurity. It wasn't a particularly fast edition from a raw time perspective, but he will possess the home court advantage in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He's bred to stretch out, and as you mentioned, Game Winner won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile himself at Churchill Downs in 2018, and Gaming's broodmare sire, Johannesburg, was also a Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner back in 2001 at Belmont Park. So this horse is impeccably bred to perform well in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, to win champion 2-year-old honors, and I think he's got a pretty bright future ahead of him.
James, you had to at least notice, I understand his agent is the owner's brother, but Flavian Pratt going out west to ride a 2-year-old had to at least garner some attention, given he gave up probably
Well, I think Nick is frozen on us there, but yeah, Juan Hernandez had ridden both Getaway Car and Gaming in their debut. Then Gaming actually ran on August 11th card, and his final raw time for that 6.5 furlong, 5.5 length maiden win was faster than a stakes race later on that program. So that was a notable performance at the time, I thought, when he broke his maiden on August 11th. And it was, obviously Baffert had his three big hitters in there. But this was really the one that was overlooked. Citizen Bull was a little bit of a surprising favorite over Getaway Car. They were both, Getaway Car was 2 for 2. Citizen Bull was 1 for 1. And Gaming really, I thought, outshone both of them. He didn't get away real sharply from the inside, and there for a split second, he was like last to 6, but he immediately quit Vance forward to be in a good spot down the back stretch. When Flavian Pratt tipped him outside of Getaway Car on the far turn, he made a really nice move to take the lead. And I thought he really accelerated into the stretch nicely as well. I thought that was really the key for him at that point, because at that same point, Mackenzie Street was trying to get involved. It looked like Citizen Bull maybe came over on him a little bit, tightened him up, and he sort of lost his momentum briefly, I thought. And then he came again, and I thought really ran a good second. I mean, he's like 4 lengths clear of third. So I'm going to take away both Gaming and Mackenzie Street from that race. And look for them to continue to run well this fall. Like I said, Mackenzie Street, he's the son of Mackenzie, who's really starting to come on with Chancellor McPatrick winning the hopeful. And I think this is a very nice colt for Tim Yakteen. Even though he wound up second on this occasion, he might be able to turn the tables in the future. And, to me, I could give Citizen Bull a break for his third place effort, but Getaway Car, Nick, I don't know what you think, but perhaps, he's by curling, but he doesn't look like he's going 2 turns. He might be more of a sprinter type in the future.
Yeah, I think the word I'd use is exposed, right? I think his first 2 races maybe were a little bit better, or I should say viewed as a little bit better than they actually were. And when I got to look at the pace figures going into Sunday, I thought, this horse really is in a bad spot. He's drawn inside. There's a lot of other speed. He didn't really go very quickly, and he won a suspect edition of the Best Pal. So it's amazing how quickly the pack can catch up to you in these 2-year-old races. If you're just a little bit and can gain what looks like an edge, but it will evaporate very, very quickly. Speaking of horses of that regard, in having won the Sorrento in her prior start, she went off a pretty big favorite in the Del Mar Debutante. Did not perform particularly well, but it was another Baffert, the other Baffert, if you will, Tenma, getting the job done just in time, right on the wire. James, Tenma looks like a filly who could be Breeders' Cup caliber, in your opinion?
Oh, definitely a pretty nice win, and then the runner-up as well. Really, it looks like a filly that will continue to move forward off of that second place effort. So I came away with a favorable impression of the top 2. I thought Nooney had looked a little bit workmanlike in the Sorrento. And, but, I could have been mistaken about that as well. So, but I was a little bit suspicious of her, and it was a disappointing effort for sure, considering how convincingly she had won her first 2 starts.
Similar to what you said about the futurity, Vance, the Del Mar Debutante did not hold up all that well against the clock, and that does concern me moving forward. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And plus the finish was a little bit narrow here. Not much separation between those top 2. I don't know what their plans are, if they're going to train up to the Breeders' Cup or maybe take in the Oak Leaf Stakes, which is now the Oak Leaf again. It's no longer the Chandelier, but I think I'm going to take a suspect view of the top 2 here, just based on that raw time and speed figure.
And let me just add one thing with these 2-year-old races. We saw Tammaro last year win the Del Mar Debutante and train up to the juvenile fillies, and those fillies are essentially going 2 turns the first time in November, having not run since like early September. I don't mind these layoffs up to the Breeders' Cup for all other divisions, but these 2-year-olds, I think it's important to get a prep this fall before they go run in the at a mile and a 16th in either the juvenile or juvenile fillies.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think in an era where the average days off prior to Breeders' Cup performance is just skyrocketing year in and year out, I think the juvenile races are probably the categories where you're going to see that number stay relatively low. Of course, it's obvious that those horses are going to run less frequently and are more likely to run a little bit closer to the Breeders' Cup. But I agree. I think it's a big ask to go from 7/8 to a mile and a 16th, and I think. I don't know if the connections of Tammaro would tell you that they might have done it differently, looking at it in retrospect, but I think they probably at least consider it. She also didn't train as great coming into the Breeders' Cup as she had in some of those prior starts. There was one more filly who I thought looked really good over the weekend at Del Mar, and I think, Vance, you did as well with Thought Process winning the Del Mar Juvenile Fillies Turf on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, she really caught the eye, and she won rather stylishly. She was a heavy favorite in the race, 2-5 against a big field, coming off of a maiden win over the course and distance. And she always looked a winner to me through the final quarter mile, and she really propelled herself into contention for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf off that effort. Really appeared to skip over the ground. I think trainer Phil D'Amato said as much after the race, and she could prove tough in the Breeders' Cup. And keep in mind that the Juvenile Fillies Turf in the Breeders' Cup has been largely dominated by U.S.-based fillies. Europe doesn't typically send over their very best fillies for the Breeders' Cup, and it's the complete opposite to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, where I think Europe tends to bring, or the European contingent tends to bring some of their top colts over for that. So if you want to concentrate mostly on the U.S.-based fillies in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf, I think Thought Process is a good place to start.
James, can we look out west for a Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf contender?
Well, I actually missed that race live, so I still got a little bit of homework. But Vance makes a good point. I mean, we saw the U.S. fillies run well. The U.S. fillies, that's one division, and maybe that will change in the years to come, but they have more than held their own in the juvenile fillies turf seemingly over the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from a larger perspective, the Jessamine was won by a maiden who was trying turf. I'm sorry, not the Jessamine. The P.G. Johnson was won by a maiden trying turf for the first time. Chad Brown did not have any particularly good-looking 2-year-old turf fillies at Saratoga. The Kentucky Downs races didn't look to yield much. This filly is the best 2-year-old turf horse from California the Breeders' Cup's ever seen. It's not even close, in my opinion, from a speed figure perspective. Now, that's saying a little bit about what we've had prior, but she's a lot faster than those horses. This is a good pedigree and one geared towards her getting longer. She's half to Creative Cairo, who was a hard-knocking turf allowance type, but it's Brereton Jones family. Collecteds have not been that great on turf, but I do think she's the outlier. I'm big on Thought Process. I actually think she can be very dangerous, and I guess a little part of me kind of hopes that some of these California turf horses do well in the Breeders' Cup because they kind of took it on the chin last year. And there's a lot more good turf racing in Southern California than there's been in a while. So it was a good closing weekend to Del Mar, and we look forward to the Santa Anita meet coming up after a couple of weeks at Los Al. Well, it's that time to take a look at what we're looking at otherwise, and I know, James, you had a couple of things that we foreshadowed a little bit. What are they in your what else section of this show?
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention, I mean, it's really remarkable how many quick turnarounds. That was the Kentucky Downs meets. It's 7 racing days over 2 weeks, and just saw a lot of horses come back, make their second start of the meet over the weekend, and 2 of them won the big stakes. Goliad, the Mint Million winner, Goliad, had run 6 days earlier, won a $500,000 handicap the previous Sunday, came right back in front-running fashion and won the Mint Million. And then the Tistastic as well. He had run 10 days earlier in a maiden race and wheeled back and in the juvenile mile off of a short week and a half rest. And I wanted to say Greenfinch. Coolmore owned, Aidan O'Brien trained filly. Coolmore sent a trio of runners to Kentucky Downs last weekend for the stakes. One of them was Greenfinch. She finished 4th as the favorite in the ladies marathon, and she's entered Wednesday in the $1.6 million Doing Grounds Oaks. So be interesting to see if they run her back on 4 days rest. I'd seen where Brendan Walsh somebody had asked him about these quick turnarounds, and he was like, it's a lot easier on turf when you're not running with Lasix to come back on short rest than it is on dirt. That's why it's no big deal in Australia or Europe. And he's not surprised to see a lot of horses doing the same thing at Kentucky Downs.
Vance, any thoughts on that?
Nothing beyond what James has discussed here.
Yeah, I wonder a little bit. I mean, I'm obviously opinionated, but I think a lot of this stuff that we're fed about horses needing a lot of time between races is hogwash. I think that it does exist in some capacity, but I do think a lot of these horses in top condition, trained for individual objectives, can certainly come back a week later and offer up the same kind of effort. And it's good to see two old school. Steve Asmussen might not love me referring to him as an old school horseman, but definitely Dick Mandela doing it with Goliath. So I thought it was nice to see. It's always a good reminder that, you know, you get a horse to peak physical condition, they can often run back quite quickly. It's why every year I bang the drum for Derby also rans to run in the Preakness, because you had him ready for a race on one day. 2 weeks later is pretty quick back, that they're probably still going to be maintaining that level of fitness and condition. Vance, you're going to talk a little bit about a race that's been a pretty key prep for the Breeders' Cup Mile. That is the Prix de Milan de Longchamp that took place last Sunday.
Yeah, Godolphin was already well loaded for the Breeders' Cup Mile going into the race, and now they've got another major contender. This race was kind of billed as a showdown between Charon, who's the top older miler in Europe, and the 3-year-old Godolphin-owned Notable Speech, who won the 2,000 guineas in Sussex Stakes. But this Godolphin horse, based in France, 5-year-old Tribalist, just registered a huge upset on Sunday in the Moulin. A front-running score for trainer Andre Fabre. This 5-year-old took the lead, never looked back, and won pretty handily over Charon. Notable Speech finished 5th in the race. Tribalist had placed in the French 2,000 guineas a couple of years ago, but was primarily a Group 2, Group 3 type horse since then, running his best races at Saint-Cloud in Paris, which is a left-handed track compared to the right-handed track at Longchamp. And to show what a big upset this was, Tribalist was sent off at 25-1 in the French Parimutuel and 20-1 in the Whirlpool. Fabre mentioned the Breeders' Cup Mile as a possible next start for Tribalist. But I do think Notable Speech, who ran 5th here, might be worth another look. This race was run on soft ground, and Notable Speech has been kind of an enigma this year, and I'm sure the soft conditions on Sunday played a role in his dull 5th place effort. He's undoubtedly going to get the faster ground that he relishes at Del Mar, and you know, based on his very best races, as we saw at Newmarket in the 2,000 guineas and at Goodwood in the Suffolks, I think he's not a horse to dismiss, and he should be a decent price in the Breeders' Cup Mile if he does come over for it. So as much as I love reigning mile winner Master of the Seas, who we might see this coming weekend in the Woodbine Mile, Notable Speech, in my mind, perhaps could be an intriguing price play at Del Mar.
How about that, Nick? A 5th place finisher to watch out for, the price of the Breeders' Cup Mile.
I mean, that's why you tune in, right? Vance is making sure the audience is reminded of it left and right. But Andre Fabre, of course, a 5-time Breeders' Cup winner, his most recent of them coming right at Del Mar 7 years ago with Talismanic, taking the turf. Definitely looking forward. Let's talk about the final segment here, which is me talking a little bit about the upcoming weekend at Churchill Downs, where we're going to have a series of stakes races that really look outstanding. Pocahontas and Iroquois. A little concerned about the weather, though, as Hurricane Francine barrels towards the Gulf Coast. We'll hope that things go relatively well for everyone between there and the Ohio Valley, and hoping for a little bit of an eastward trek that would help to keep things dry at Churchill. But nonetheless, a really fun day of racing that we're looking forward to on Saturday. I'd invite all of you to stick around as I school James Scully on Morning Lines, considering that he had some comments to make about last week's Kentucky Downs action. But we've run out of time for that to happen now. A big thank you to all of you for joining us for this edition of the Racing Roundtable. Vance, James, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. You'll have Ashley back to keep things a little bit more civil moving forward, and that's probably not a bad thing.
Hey, thanks for being here, Nick. It's been great.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys, and thanks to all of you. Be sure to keep up with the Twin Spires Racing Roundtable every Tuesday. We've got the jury coming up on Thursday and a slew of promotions and information at twinspires.com. Head there for all the action, including a lot of Twin Spires tournaments, which I know you'll hear more about and on a regular basis from Darren Zocali about. Thanks again, everybody. Until next time, good luck.
When it comes to horse racing, you can never have too much information. With Twin Spires, you can place your bets with confidence. Whether you use handicapping insights, like our Brisnet speed ratings, prime power and past performances, the guidance of our experts' top picks, or just choose a name that catches your eye. Yes! No matter how you pick your horse, bet with Twin Spires. And now you can race to victory with Twin Spires tournaments.